October 16th, 2024, and you're watching The Pipeline. I'm Derek Fildebrandt, publisher of the Western Standard. I'm joined, as always, by Western Standard opinion editor Nigel Hannaford.
Hello again, Eric.
And Western Standard senior Alberta columnist Cory Morgan.
Good day.
We're also going to have joining us later in the show Western Standard's Saskatchewan bureau chief and editing manager of the Saskatchewan Standard, Chris Oldcorn, talked to us about the election there, as well as Western Standard's BC bureau chief and managing editor of the West Coast Standard, Jared Yager, talking about BC's election. Before we get into there, though, we're going to start with the big story cooking in Canada today. Allegations of India currying favor, if you will. That's you know what? That's Nigel's. That's not. And it wasn't. And it was an unintentional pun at our meeting earlier today when we're figuring out what we're going to talk about. India, I don't think it's any great surprise, has at least some nefarious interference in Canada. I haven't seen direct allegations of electoral interference yet. I'd be shocked if there wasn't at least some minor electoral interference. The different Indian diasporas are a pretty significant portion of the Canadian population, and diasporas are they're a hot commodity for politicians looking for votes, and they're a hot target for foreign powers from which the diasporas originate. We know how that's happening in India. Sorry, with the Chinese case, very significantly. But we're hearing more about India now. The allegation being that, you know, a very large proportion, I'm not sure what proportion of the Indian diaspora in Canada, at least a large portion, maybe even a majority of it in Canada, tends to be Sikh, some of which has Khalistani independence movement sympathies. And some of that, I think, is perfectly legitimate. People who want independent homeland for Sikh Indians. But some within that movement are obviously very extremist and have committed terrible acts of terrorism and violence. And most notoriously, that manifested itself in the, I think, 1985 bombing of Air India.
Yes, 329 people.
Yeah. So it has very real manifestations on our shores here. And the allegations, and I think these parts are quite believable so far, is that the Indian government under Prime Minister Modi, who's quite fierce against the Khalistani movement, both its legitimate and its illegitimate manifestations, has been trying to put it down, the Khalistani movement in Canada. And that's allegedly now taken the form of murders, targeted hits. And there have been some very notable Khalistani supporters, some of which are maybe unsavory, some of which are probably legitimate, getting killed on allegedly targeted hits from the Indian government with the sign-off of Modi. It's quite an allegation. But it took a strange turn yesterday, Nigel, when Prime Minister Trudeau was suddenly seized by a zeal all of a sudden to tackle foreign interference. It was racist to talk about it a year ago when it was in his party, but all of a sudden it's now the number one issue, and he is on the attack.
Well, he would be, wouldn't he? You mentioned the power of the diaspora vote, and he has always behaved as though it's there for him when he needs it. Right now, he really needs it, and I think what you're seeing here is a very cynical play. This has been, as you said, going on for 40 years. And that this being the activities of Khalistani terrorists, Sikh terrorists, if you will, who want an independent state of Khalistan. I mean, it's not just what they've done here with the Air India bombing. They were responsible for the murder of an Indian prime minister, Indira Gandhi, as well as various other outrages. So these are very serious players. And I can absolutely understand why the Indian government would want to know what was going on here, would want to do something about it in just the same way as if we, as Canadians, had a Canadian diaspora movement that wanted to separate some piece of territory from Canada and was doing it from India. We would be very, very interested. What's changed is this. It used to be that all of this kind of got dealt with at the local police level. The RCMP, the Canadian security agencies would talk to the other people and try and keep a lid on it. Meanwhile, you were free to have a relationship between two strong and powerful countries. That's how it was. Now, as you say, Mr. Trudeau has politicized the event, and I think for very narrow partisan purposes, as a difficult election approaches for him.
Yeah, Cory, Trudeau claimed any discussion of the Chinese Communist Party's interference in Canada was racist, and that it just didn't hold up. Unfortunately for him, he was making that argument just as the woke movement started to collapse. People stopped buying the excuse that anything you talk about that's controversial is racist anymore. But that's crumbled. But now he's willing to talk about this because I guess he's trying to play the triangulate in politics here. And I think for a lot of non-Sikh or non-Indian Canadians, it's difficult to grasp. But here's my best attempt to explain it as best I know, is Trudeau operates at least on the assumption that Sikhs do not like Modi and India because Modi is as a Hindu nationalist. And bashing Modi is good politics with Sikhs in Canada. And there are more Sikhs in Canada than other groups from India by and large. I think so. I think that's the play. And, the Indian government's alleged, and I think credibly alleged, that Canada has also become a safe haven for Khalistani militant or even terrorist training. That some of this there's actually been training taking place here. Not just that it's a safe haven for Khalistani separatists. I'm actually okay with that, as long as you actually keep your politics off our streets. If you're in Canada, stick to Canadian issues. If you want to deal with your diaspora issue, do it back there, not here. But Trudeau then came out today testifying again at the foreign interference inquiry. And this was just gobsmacking. He says there are a large number of conservatives under foreign influence, and I could name them. He went on the attack. No mention of the very serious problems with Communist Party infiltration in his party. Chinese Communist Party infiltration, probably infiltration from others. Mm-hmm. And I have no doubt that other foreign governments hold sway with people, probably in most, at least, of the big parties who have some support in some of the ethnic enclaves. But Trudeau goes on the attack just today, saying the conservatives are full of foreign interference, and I can name them. And Pierre Poilievre responded right away and says, "Name them, and name all of them." Because we know that there's a significant number that the intelligence committee have named that are compromised, are either fully treasonous or unwittingly treasonous in different parties, and Trudeau's refused to name them. But then he comes up with this today. Is he just making this up, or do you think maybe he finally has a card to play?
I'm guessing here at his motivations. I don't think he's making something up. I suspect, this is a big report. 11, they said, were known parliamentarians witting and unwittingly compromised. And we've always assumed Chinese, but it could mean Indian, it could mean Russian, it could be a lot of things. Mm-hmm. It's the innuendo that's getting tiresome. It's the picking a little bit out and blaming the other party without just releasing it. Then get it out there, because you're causing more distrust. You're fostering it, and it's for political purposes. Prime Minister Trudeau has never been very good when he goes off script, and that was part of the problem with the inquiry today. You don't have a teleprompter in front of you, you're answering questions, and I suspect, because it was a very clumsy way to try and deal with this, that this might have been his own brainstorm on the spot, and now he's kind of painted himself into a corner. It ties in with a lot with the Indian issue, though, and when he's playing, as Nigel kind of said, politicize this. This has been going on for a long, long time, and it doesn't mean we should ignore it. But when you start throwing it onto the floor, it changes everything, and we start paying a price. We can't forget, India and Canada trade $10 billion a year. Again, it seems to always come back to who are the main exporters to India? Western farmers. So if we start getting sanctions, it's going to be the West paying the price on this again too. So he's not going to lose Central Canadian political points diving into this mess. But the Indian Khalistani issue is nuanced, it's dangerous, it's messy, and I don't like when Prime Minister Trudeau jumps into it, because he's not a nuanced, careful politician. We had a radio host beat up in North Calgary just a couple weeks ago.
He's a friend of mine.
And that was a couple of Sikh individuals who jumped him in the parking lot and laid a beating into him because they disagreed with his views on the Khalistani thing. This is real, and it should be addressed. But again, it shouldn't be addressed with political motivations like Trudeau's doing. And we should be seeing how we can stop this sort of carnage on our streets. It's just bad.
Well, yeah, but I mean, they're politicians. Political motivations are going to inform everything they do. I just suppose the question is, to what extent should political consideries inform things?
They're always there, I understand.
Yeah. But, I think this is, Nigel, I think this is the inevitable endgame of mass immigration, open door immigration, and diaspora politics, where we brought people in such a rapid level where they're unable to assimilate into the broader Canadian mainstream. And now a ethno-political fight around Khalistan in a part of India that I guarantee you 9 out of 10 Canadians could not point out on a map, like where Khalistan is kind of roughly supposed to be in India. Yet that is a driving force in our politics. It is very important. For the NDP, the Conservatives, and the Liberals, Sikhs are a major group in Canada. They're now a major voting bloc. They're power brokers at any political party now, for the most part. And they are within the Conservatives too. Where do you think the danger is for the Conservatives in maybe in the broader question of diaspora politics, but also in their goal of trying to get close to the Sikh community, to bring them into the party, to get their votes, but to not end up playing diaspora politics to the point where it's influencing our foreign policy and our national security?
It's certainly an issue to think of. To the point about how strong the Sikh voice is in Canada, I had the opportunity to check some notes here, and apparently Sikhs occupy 15 seats in the Canadian Parliament. There are, in fact, more Sikh cabinet ministers in Prime Minister Trudeau's cabinet than there are in Prime Minister Modi's cabinet in India. Something that Mr. Trudeau...
Oh, that is a hell of a statistic.
Well, that's just something about the imbalance in India, too.
Yeah.
I mean, Modi is not known to be the friendliest towards
apparently not. And the thing was, it was Mr. Trudeau pointed this out back in 2016, and you can imagine he's barely newly minted prime minister. He barely knows where the washrooms are, and he's already taking pot shots at the Prime Minister of India, who the Harper administration had developed a very cordial relationship with, and poking him like that. Well, yes, it was true. There were 4 Sikhs in Mr. Trudeau's cabinet at that time, but he chose to mention it. Now there's actually 2% of the population is Sikh, and 4% of the MPs are Sikh. So they're very strong in Canada. It's almost impossible not to play that kind of game. You're not going to say anything offensive, but what they can do and should do is emphasize the Canadianness of a politician. If you're going to serve in the House of Commons, you're serving Canadians, not people in another country. And that is about messaging. It's about enforcing that in your members. And that is something that Mr. Trudeau has conspicuously failed to do.
I think we should mention that to the NDP candidate in that recent Montreal by-election, who ran without Canadian flags on her literature, but had Palestinian flags. So, the member for Gaza.
Well, okay, to your larger point about what is the danger, has it all come apart? Yes, it has, and that'll be the next group. I refer you to that scurrilous little video of the assault by Palestinians on the RCMP cars outside the Longevin block yesterday.
Well, I know you're going to get to that
but
later on.
That's a teaser.
All right. Well, we're going to put a pin on the India file here. And we're going to bring in our British Columbia bureau chief for the Western Standard and our managing editor for West Coast Standard, Jared Yager. Jared, thank you for joining us. We actually just had you out here in Calgary for our annual staff meeting. It was glad to have you out here in person. But you're back on the ground in BC now. The election this is very odd. I have never seen an election taking place on a Saturday or Sunday. It's only a Monday or Tuesday. Elections on weekends tend to be an internal party race, like a nomination or a leadership race or something. But British Columbians go to the polls this Saturday. What are the polls showing, and what can they expect right now on election day this Saturday?
Hi, nice to see you guys again. So the most recent poll from the Angus Reid Institute was taken between October 9th and 13th, just after the latest leadership debate. And it showed the NDP at 45% and the Conservatives at 40%. Now, it's hard to tell whether that was due to policy or whether it was due to other factors, because in amongst that time, I don't know if you guys saw, but the candidate for South Surrey, Brent Chapman, some of his old social media posts came out. And so I'm wondering if maybe that influenced the polling a little bit. And so yeah, the NDP and the Conservatives, they've been going back and forth in the polls for the past few months now. And so honestly, the only poll that matters is the one taken on election day. But right now it's impossible to tell who's going to come out on top.
Well, I mean, the only poll that matters is the one taken on election day. That's something you hear candidates often say when they're losing. When they're winning, they say, the polls are just showing how great we are. So I take that. I mean, there's been a lot of controversy around some BC Conservative candidates. I mean, the party was just kind of slapped together. It is a very new party. It's not an old experienced machine. I mean, the NDP and then, its predecessor, the CCF, have been around in British Columbia since the 1930s in one form or another. It's a seasoned machine. It is the current government. The BC Conservatives are kind of like a kit car. It's just kind of thrown together from spare parts in the junkyard, and it's got a lot of horsepower, but it's got some untested parts. How much do you think it's the kind of the social media posts, controversies around some of the Conservative candidates? Do you think that's having and the NDP hammering at that every day, is that having an effect now? Because the NDP has opened up a mild gap here, whereas a week ago it was neck and neck or even a minor lead for the Conservatives.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it's definitely having an impact on more of the centrist voters who maybe like some of the Conservative policies but can't stomach the sentiments being expressed by some of the candidates. But John Rustad yesterday at a press conference, when he was unveiling his platform, he made a good point. He said people should focus not on the words of Brent Chapman, but the actions of David Eby. And to see, like, okay, yes, he said these things and we condemn them, but is it worth sacrificing the province for the next 4 years just because you don't like what somebody said online?
Cory, I mean, you've had experience. You were involved heavily in the earlier stages of the Wild Rose. I mean, there's some parallels between the Wild Rose insurgency in 2012 as that was a brand new party, although it was probably more well put together and had more of an infrastructure than the BC Conservatives today, because the BC Conservatives are very much an ad hoc coalition thrown together at this point compared to Wild Rose then. But maybe you could speak to what are the dangers for the BC Conservatives when they have this many untested? Almost all their candidates are non-incumbents, except for a few BC Liberals who came over. How dangerous is it for a party in this position?
It's very dangerous because people have a fear of the unknown. And that's when it makes it easy to paint a hidden agenda. It makes it easy to, put fear in the minds of the voters, saying we don't know what these people are going to do. And if we can find any comments, social media, things like that to reinforce that fear and make it appear that this is a Trojan horse full of extremists coming through, it can be very effective. I was speaking of that earlier on my show with Wildrose case with the Huntsberger issue and people taking his quotes on the Lake of Fire and such. We were doing very well in the polls, and it was dramatic, though. It was like voters were giving us support, but it was tentative. It didn't take much to knock them right off us again if they saw something fearful, and it was effective. We were decimated in that final week. I don't think we would have won that election, but we would have had a heck of a lot more seats. And I think that the BC Conservatives are in just as much of a sensitive position. They're doing well. People want to support them, but these aren't long, well-entrenched supporters. These are recent supporters coming on board as voters, and they can easily be pushed off of that support if they feel that there's something to fear.
Nigel, I don't know. How much do you think the Conservatives are, the BC Conservatives are having their boats just lifted by the rising tide of the federal Conservatives right now? How much of this is kind of a homegrown, organic rebellion against the EV government and, to an extent, rebellion against the BC United Liberals and their failure to offer an alternative, a sufficiently different alternative for some time? And how much of it do you think is just the rising tide of conservatism and the capital C conservative brand across the country as Poilievre's lead its eye-watering levels?
There are a lot of people who don't make the distinction between the Liberals of Ottawa and the Liberals of BC, and that actually caused the Liberals of BC to disassociate themselves from the federal group by changing their name. Therefore, it is entirely conceivable, as you suggest, that the increased popularity of the federal Conservatives is going to help the provincial Conservatives. But I think there's something else going on there. It puzzles me that after the tepid response offered by David Eby to the outrages in Vancouver, where the flags were burned and people were proudly claiming themselves to be, we are Hamas, we are Hezbollah, death to Canada. And he said so, came out with some sort of weak anodyne, staff-written condemnation, that didn't cause an exit from the NDP. So for that reason, I'm somewhat suspicious of the latest of any poll that has been taken since then that puts the NDP in a large lead. Doesn't seem right.
Jared, the polling is, I guess, confusing at this point. The ability to project onto local races is difficult because the BC Conservatives have never truly contested an election in a serious way in, was it 1930s the last time they were a major party? Was it the 30s?
The Conservatives?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, before the war. So it was social credit all through the 1950s.
Yeah. So the actual, under the Conservative banner, it's the 1930s. But I suppose we can roughly substitute the former BC Liberals for Conservatives for seat projections. What are the main regions and what are the bellwether constituencies that you're watching on election night? That, if this riding, and this riding flip blue, that's going to mean a blue government, or if they go orange, this is going to be an orange government. What are the main ridings you're watching?
Well, the Conservatives, as you would expect, have pretty broad support in, rural BC, up in the north and the interior. Vancouver Island, it's going to stay NDP or Green. That's just how they are over there.
You don't think some of the kind of bigger northern island ridings are going to go over, or you think the whole island's then orange?
There's a chance, but I wouldn't bank on it. But in the Lower Mainland here, there's a bit of a blue wave, if you will, and two of the ridings that I'm really watching are over in Abbotsford Mission with Rayanne Gasper. She's going up against the Agriculture Minister, Pam Alexis. And I was over there a couple weeks ago, and I saw a pretty grassroots campaign bloom into something more, where there's a lot of support. People were packing the theater for her, and so I think people are ready for change over there, and also here in Vancouver. David Eby's riding, Vancouver Point Grey. Paul Ratchford, he put up a stellar performance against Eby in the latest debate, and it's not too often you see an incumbent premier get such a negative reaction in his own riding. So those are kind of the two I'm watching right now.
Point Grey, was that Gordon Campbell's riding back in the day?
I'm not too sure about that.
All right, well, we want to check on that, but that rings a bell. I mean,
Well, it's because that's a Point Grey school where Justin Trudeau used to teach a long time ago.
oh, we can't talk about
That's a
that
separate
school
issue
for
altogether,
legal
yeah.
reasons. We'll get sued if you. I'm not encouraging anyone to Google Justin Trudeau and Point Grey School because we can't talk about it here without getting sued.
Either way, I think that might be what's ringing the bell.
So I won't encourage anyone to Google it right now.
It was Gordon Campbell's writing.
There
Okay.
you go. Both. Okay.
All right. Well, I get a little BC political trivia.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what do you think what could we expect now? We're in the last few weekdays of campaigning. I mean, there's only a few days left of the campaign. The parties have got their platforms out. They've made most of their pitch. So now they're, they're largely going to turn now to get out the vote. But what are we going to hear from the campaigns? What can we expect in the last few dying days of this campaign?
Well, from the David Eby campaign, you're going to hear a lot of attacks on Rustad against his candidates, and the policies themselves, but more character attacks than anything else. And from the Conservatives, it's going to be the opposite. You're going to see a lot of attacks on policy because Eby has a record to go up against. Rustad, he hasn't been a leader he's never been a leader in government. Whereas with Eby, you just look outside and you can see the product of his past time in government. So I think, all the parties are going to double down on what they've already said and really just hammer down those attacks that they've been going out for the past few weeks.
All right. It's Jared Yager, BC Bureau Chief for the Western Standard and Managing Editor of the West Coast Standard. Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, we're going to turn east of us now. You Eastern bastards in Saskatchewan. We're going to bring in Chris Oldcorn. Chris is our Saskatchewan Bureau Chief of the Western Standard and Managing Editor. Thank you for joining us, Chris.
Derek?
All right. So your election it's just not as exciting as British Columbia's. But we checked in with you last week. It's just, it's not good for the news business. But what's been animating the campaign for the last week?
Basically, both parties had to come out with their platforms because there's the debate tonight, which is ironically at 6 o'clock at night, which seems like a weird time to have a 1 hour debate when people are coming home from work and having dinner, but that's when they scheduled it. And basically the platforms, there's nothing new in them. They had already all made those announcements. And so the Sask Party is campaigning on income tax and then also not raising the small business tax from 1% to 2% next year when it's supposed to go back up. They completely eliminated the small business tax during COVID. And then last year it went up by 1% and it's supposed to go back up by another % next year. Other than that, nothing really exciting. We've had some issues in hospitals, including here in Regina, where our two main hospitals are missing a doctor who's required for very key diagnoses. So anyone that needs certain tests has to actually go to Saskatoon now, as well as we had 2 ERs close over the weekend, requiring people in rural areas to drive over an hour just to get to the nearest open ER. So healthcare is the number one concern in the province right now. Poll came out just a couple hours ago showing that basically 61% of people think that healthcare is either the top issue or one of the top issues. And unfortunately for the Sask Party, only 5% felt that they were doing a good job with healthcare. So the NDP is just hammering healthcare every single day with different healthcare type announcements. But they all revolve around hiring more healthcare workers, which is a problem for anyone who gets into government because there's just not enough going around to begin with.
Well, so let's talk about the polls.
Mm-hmm.
This election, going into it, expectations were that the Sask Party was going to lose seats. And that this election would be either fully competitive or at least more competitive than it has been for a long time. The Saskatchewan Party has been in for a long time. I think, are they going for is it fourth or fifth majority government they're going for here?
This would be the fifth. Yes, they've been in since 2007. This will be the fifth government. Because we only have two parties, you automatically get a majority if you win.
Yeah.
However, the lines have been redrawn for this election, so we're now up to 61 ridings.
Mhm.
So even if the Sask Party, let's say they do get to that magic number of 40 that they've been above, it's not as impressive as previous elections because we have more ridings now.
Yeah.
And so, but still, I would say you're looking at a Sask Party government probably in the high 30s, which means the NDP are basically, they're going to have to be somewhere in the mid to low 20s. Plus, we have some other parties that may pick off a couple ridings as well.
Do you think there's a real chance that smaller parties like the PCs, Buffalo, Sask United, do they actually have a chance at winning seats, or just perhaps being spoilers in a few, or perhaps running a decent second place? Do they really have a chance of winning a small number of seats?
Well, Nadine Wilson up in Sask Rivers, who left the Sask Party to be the first leader of Sask United, her race is very close. She's probably going to win it, though.
You think she will?
I think she will. Yes. It'll be close. I don't expect it to be more than a couple percentage points apart. But people really like her in her riding. And before she was even with the Sask Party, she was also involved in other elected positions as well. So she's very well known in the community. However, she could lose that seat to the Sask Party, and even the Sask NDP think they might have a shot because of the Conservative vote being split between Sask Party and Sask United. They actually think they could play spoiler there. I'm not sure if that's going to happen. I don't think it would, because they still need to get around 30% support to be able to do it.
So how tight are the polls right now? Does the NDP have any? I mean, there's still a little time to go in the campaign. It's
Yes.
BC is this weekend.
Yep.
You're out another roughly 2 weeks ish, right?
Yeah, on Monday, October 28th. However, people can start voting on the 22nd. We actually have a week of early polls. So there is the opportunity to actually even start voting as early as the 22nd.
Is there any prospect of the NDP able to turn this around and actually go for a slight win here, or you think it's pretty cooked in at this point?
I think it's pretty cooked in at this point. The Sask Party has not made a public appearance of Scott Moe in 4 days until tonight at the debate. He will have to face a media scrum after that. I think some of that has to do with some questions I've been asking that they don't want to answer. But we'll find out tonight when I get a chance to ask those questions. But I don't think the NDP is in a position to win this election because, unfortunately for them, they have great support in the cities of Saskatoon and Regina. But once you get outside of the two major largest cities in the province, their support really tanks. I mean, even at their convention last year, they had a seminar on how to talk to rural people for their candidates. like we're talking about a party that talks great to like people in urban centers, but when you drive 20 minutes outside of either of those cities, and their message just kind of falls flat on its face, unfortunately for them. And there's no way that you can become premier in this province without winning rural seats as well as winning urban seats. And on top of that, the Sask Party actually does fairly well in Saskatoon as well. So there's a lot of battlegrounds there that they're probably going to hold. So it's not going to be the city's flipping completely orange.
I'll put either of you two gentlemen on what's going on in Saskatchewan.
Well, I've been watching it. I mean, peripherally and so on, and it's been hard. And I mean, I'm a political watcher, and I think a lot of Saskatchewan. I worked out there. I mean, they're very kindred spirits to Alberta. I mean, we're close neighbors, and I'm very concerned. I want to make sure, hopefully, we maintain a conservative neighbor, so that it's good for a PowerPoint in the West. When we talk about dealing with Ottawa, no matter which government's in there. But it does appear, from what I can see, is that the Sask Party has taken it on cruise control and just wants to kind of ride it in. Nobody moves, nobody gets hurt. We might shed a few seats, but we'll maintain power. I'm thinking the bigger discussions will be the day after the election, though, because they do seem to be tired in the eyes of the voters, and they're going to need some kind of rejuvenation. From the outside, looking into them, I think maybe some of the discussions over the longer run, but not immediately, is maybe it's time for Scott Moe to go out to pasture and somebody fresh to come into that party in the next election cycle. But for now, just watching and hoping that, as Chris is saying, at least anyways, that they can maintain a conservative stronghold out in Saskatchewan.
Yeah, I mean, just getting rid of the leader may not be enough. In Alberta, we saw a whole 40 years of the Progressive Conservatives, during which we had Ralph Klein, Don Getty. I'm not going in order here, but
Changing leaders did save them many times.
well, just till the next
Until it didn't.
until the next
It
precipice.
did not only once.
The problem with the Progressive Conservative Party in Alberta was that it was widely perceived, and with some reason, to be just a governing club. And you could be in government for a while, and then you would come out, and you'd have contracts that paid you very well, and then you go back in again, and a sort of a revolving door of people interested. And that, I think, ultimately, plus the fact that there was nothing very conservative about the Alberta Conservatives by the time they got to the end, brought them down. Now, the opportunity for the Saskatchewan Party is to avoid that culture of privilege and to maintain a consistent strategy of being conservative, which actually having a strong NDP is going to encourage them to do.
Light a fire under their butts.
There is
yeah.
a difference.
Chris, so when we were, I guess, we're not at election day yet. I'm going to ask you a similar question, the same question as I put to Jared for BC. What are the main constituencies that you're watching? Like, what are the bellwethers? If this riding stays Saskatchewan Party, they're going to stay in government, or if it flips green, if it flips orange, NDP are going to win. What are the, say, top three bellwethers you're watching?
Well, definitely Regina Pasqua, because it's the same two candidates in the last election. In the last election, the NDP lost by just over 200 votes in the riding. So that's right here in Regina. It's in the southwestern part. And then you can also look to Regina University. That's held by, well, it's a new riding because the boundaries have been redrawn. But right now it's held by a former Saskatchewan Rough Rider, who I think has used his fame as a Rough Rider to be successful in politics. That's going to be a close riding. And then Bronwyn Eyre for the Sask Party as well. She's the Attorney General, and she's up in Saskatoon. Her riding's going to be close. Mo is even there campaigning for her. Those three ridings, if those all flip, I think you will see the NDP probably in the mid, even to high 20s. If those, because they were close in the last elections, but the seats have been held by the Sask Party. They haven't lost them yet, but they could. And this election we'll see. Because once again, Saskatoon and Regina are the spots that the NDP really needs to pick up seats.
Well, those would be bellwethers of the NDP picking up a lot of seats. But
yes,
what would be the bellwether seats of the NDP winning a slim government here?
I mean, they'd have to flip things like Nadine Wilson's Sask Rivers and some other ones that are, I mean, those are Hail Mary ridings for them that they're hoping for. And when I met with the NDP a couple of weeks ago and they kind of showed me their path to 31, I would say 6 to 7 of them are Hail Marys, and you don't make every Hail Mary pass. So they're hopeful, but they themselves don't think they can get above 31, and everything has to go right to get them to 31.
Well,
and that's going to take flipping rural seats that have been solidly Sask Party for literally decades.
Praise be to God. All right. Well, thank you, Chris, for your insights today. I'll let you get back to the campaign trail.
Thanks very much, Derek.
All right, gentlemen. We've saved a little more time than usual, not a lot, but a little more time than usual for our parting shots. I realized just today as I was sketching out my notes, it's PS. It's a great way to, it's our postscript of the show. It's a great way to finish it off. So, Nigel, your parting shot today.
See, I thought that was the plan all along.
So you knew it. I didn't.
Fildebrandt's brilliant. That's just great. So anyway, the truth is finally out there. Look, parting shot. There's a video doing the rounds. We talked about this earlier. What you see is outside the Langevin block. For those who are not familiar with Ottawa, the Langevin block is where the government does its, where the Prime Minister's office does its business. It's right across the Wellington Street from Parliament. And there's a couple of Prime Minister's personal detail black limousines pulled up outside there, and they're stormed by a group of Palestinian, I guess they're pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas protesters.
At this point, we call them Hamas, Hezbollah people.
They swarmed them, and the RCMP backed up and de-escalated the situation as they were probably told to do. What is the message? Well, look, you try and do that sort of thing in China or in the United States, and it doesn't go that way. You don't assault vehicles used by the president and get away with it. In Canada, you do. And that video has gone around the world, and it makes us look weak. It makes us look like we don't believe in our own stuff. And it makes it look like whatever you want to do in terms of pressing your issue here in Canada, you can do it up to and including storming a motorcade on Parliament Hill. That is a bad message. There needs to be consequences, and there needs to be the word go out that don't let this happen again.
I saw that, and those of we should obviously make sure we're showing some of the footage on the side here, but if you see it, you'll recognize that building because there used to be bouncy castles and hot tubs outside of it. And that got a violent police response. We all remember police cavalry trampling an old lady on her walker. That was the response for protesting outside of it. But if you're a Hamas and Hezbollah supporter attacking the prime minister's motorcade outside of it, well, then it's time for talk and de-escalation.
We don't know that the prime minister was in either of those vehicles.
No, but it is his motorcade.
They didn't know either.
They didn't know either.
No.
So that's what was going on there.
Yeah. All right. Cory, your parting shot.
Sure. Further to Canada's international reputation, a large historical Canadian company has set a record south of the border of the United States. TD Bank managed to get itself fined a record-breaking $3.1 billion, American, real dollars, not the Canadian peso, and for money laundering. I mean, this is unreal. One of the big six Canadian established banks, and this wasn't a case of a little bit of allegation or a little mistake. They were complicit. That's why the fine is so massive in laundering millions and millions of dollars. Again, we wonder why Canada has difficulty being taken seriously when we're looked at as a place for terrorist haven. But not only that, our major banks are participating in money laundering in other countries. So just a hat tip to TD. They're lucky the news scroll was as busy as it is. That kind of only made a blip in the news, but it's worth noting that's a pretty major bloody affair.
They're all about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and they're diversifying their holdings.
Oh, the Colombian holdings, yeah.
Yeah, they're just being equitable and inclusive with criminals.
Yeah, it just floored me. I thought I read it wrong when that first popped up.
So bank with a TD, but invest in the Royal, eh?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, well, good on you, TD. All right, my parting shot. Actually, we don't have Jared on here anymore, but he has a lot to do with it. The Samidoun. Am I saying that right? Samidoun.
We know what
it's phonetically.
We know what you
whatever. Samidoun. I mean, very clearly a front for certain Palestinian terrorist organizations. Has finally now been banned by the federal government. It's late, but I mean, they did the right thing in the end here. That comes after Jared Yager, our British Columbia bureau chief, was the only reporter in the country to obtain footage of Samidoun bosses leading a chant of "We are Hezbollah, we are Hamas," and death to Canada, or death to America, death to Israel, death to Canada, and burning Canadian flags. Now, burning Canadian flags, I think, is an extremely poor taste, but actually, I defend that as free speech. Free speech I really don't like, but that's why it's free speech. But death to Canada? No. We are Hamas, we are Hezbollah, so terrorist organizations who want to kill innocent people, including Canadians? No, that's advocating murder. That's not free speech. And they have now finally been, and media across Canada used the Western Standards footage that was taken by Jared Yager when he was on the streets of Vancouver. So tip of the hat again to Jared for that, and noting that the work he and the Western Standards done has played a big role in getting these bums banned as a terrorist organization in Canada. All right, well, that's it for today's show. Thank you, gentlemen, for being a part of it today. And thank all of you for joining us. Remember that the Western Standard is media bailout free. We refuse to take Justin Trudeau's big media bailouts because we rely on support from people like you. We need you to become a member. Go to westernstandard.news right now. Click on subscribe. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year for unlimited access to all Western Standard content. Not only are you going to get access to everything, you are going to be doing your part to ensure that the Western Standard, one of the last actual independent media voices left in Canada, is continuing to grow strong. Thank you very much for joining us today, and God bless. You can become a Western Standard member for just $10 a month or $99 a year for unlimited access